Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the PC Perspective Mailbag. This is our 50th episode. We've been doing this for essentially a year now. Jim tells me we haven't missed a single week, but I don't know if I believe that, but I guess I will. Surely, no, maybe during CES? I don't know. But anyway, 50 episodes we've been doing this, answering questions that you guys give us every week. We do need more questions. If you have them for us, leave them in the comments section of the post on PCPer.com that embeds this video, and or you can leave them on the YouTube video itself, and we'll go through those questions and select some to answer. We've only got a handful this week, so it might be a shorter episode. And again, I say that every time, and that never is the case. But this time, I think it's going to be real. It's going to be a little bit shorter. We're still working on the RSS thing. I think we'll end up doing that, just embedding it into the PCPer RSS feed. Not that it needs to be more complicated, but we'll see. We'll see. So let's jump into it. I, or lowercase l, asks, what do you think is going to happen to the CPU market in 2019? We know AMD has Zen 2 ready and is testing 7 nanometer. While Intel doesn't seem to have a plan and is moving slowly with 10 nanometer, could we actually see AMD destroy Intel for the first time in years? Or will people still buy Intel regardless due to brand reputation and OEM partnerships? Interesting question. So yeah, the expectation is that AMD will have their Zen 2 based processors available in 2019 some point. I don't know if it'll be, they've kind of been doing this March-April release for the first 2 generations of Ryzen. If they'll do that for Zen 2, I don't really know. Excuse me. But let's assume that they do. It's maybe in the April-May timeframe. It'll be a new architecture. It'll be a new process technology. It'll be 7 nanometer, and it will have IPC improvements along with that architectural improvement. Do I think we'll quote unquote see AMD destroy Intel? I kind of don't. I think Intel or AMD still needs to close the gap a little bit on IPC. And Zen 2 might allow them to do that. And 7 nanometer may allow them to close the gap on frequency in a lot of areas. So we could see a point where I would think we maybe hit single-threaded parity between AMD and Intel if Intel doesn't make any significant moves in the meantime. I think all indications are that they're going to be on 14 nanometer parts through 2018, 10 nanometer mass production not scheduled for... or 10 nanometer mass production not scheduled until 2019, but they won't say when. So if AMD can get stuff out, first half of 2019, they have a really good chance of making up a lot of ground. And they already made up the majority of that ground already with the first release of Zen, but they could make up more of that. Yes, Intel will still sell a ton of product. They have a great relationship with partners and OEMs and system builders. They have a good platform, robust ecosystem of channel partners and all of that come into play as well. So even if AMD comes in on par, there's going to be some areas where maybe AMD is still behind, right? If you look at low power mobile stuff, for example, right? Do I think we'll see Ryzen APUs and Ryzen mobile parts come below that 15 watt level, which they're questionably at today? Probably. Do I think they'll get into, 6 watt, 8 watt Y series class parts? I kind of don't see that yet. That's not really what the emphasis has been, because AMD's really been focused on single core design that they can utilize across server, workstation, desktop. And if they, want to bring that down into the mobile space, it's a little bit harder and trickier to do. So they're probably going to have to, increase some R&D output there. So yeah, I think 2019 is going to be where it gets really, really interesting. We've got the Ryzen 2000 series this year. We'll have the Threadripper 2000 series this year, sometime late in the summer. We're going to have 32 core processors available in just a few months. So it's kind of crazy to think about 2019 being where things get really exciting. But from a competition standpoint, that's where I think things will get really exciting. Intel is not going to stick around and do nothing, though. They're going to push that process technology that they have at 14 nanometer as hard as they can to get new products out. And we'll see what they can do in terms of core and frequency to improve their positioning, if you will. Nikolai asks, how reliable is the actual silicon in CPUs and GPUs? How often do the chips themselves fail compared to other factors like power delivery, so on? Interesting question. I would say that the silicon you get in a consumer retail product is going to be fairly resilient. Plenty of silicon fails. That's called the yield rate. That's chips that don't make it out of the factory and get scrapped versus those that do, or yields that say, hey, we can't run this chip at 5 gigahertz reliably, we can run it at 4.5 gigahertz reliably. So there's a lot of testing and eval that goes into these parts before you ever get them in your hands. So I think the silicon itself is going to be very reliable on CPUs and GPUs. The majority of the failures you see in products do come with power delivery, capacitors, resistors, those types of components that are more analog, can be pushed through overclocking. They're a little bit more, and it's designed that way. It's designed for those parts to fail before the other part fails too, which is why, back in the day, we always used to say, don't buy cheap power supplies. We still say that today, but don't buy cheap power supplies, because if that goes, it has the possibility of taking everything else with it. So yeah. Jens Ravines asks, why have they made it so hard to find a good case with external 5.25-inch bays? I like to put at least a memory card reader or Blu-ray drive in my builds, and now I have to struggle with all these external boxes cluttering up my desk because the cases I otherwise like don't have the required bays anymore. The answer to the question is simply that there aren't a whole lot of people like you that want 5.25-inch bays anymore. You and Josh are on the top of that list. I am not on that list, right? I can't remember the last time I've had a PC. And let me look down here. I can't remember the last time I've had a PC that's had an optical drive in it. I don't watch Blu-ray movies on PCs. I'll watch them on my TV through the Xbox, or previously that a Blu-ray player, what have you. When I do need something off of an optical drive, we have an external USB one that I can plug in for the 5 minutes I need to get the file off of, or what have you. And we used to need that for motherboard drivers that, a CD would come in the box and we'd have to do that, and we would transfer them off to the network drive and then access them that way. But now we just download all the drivers anyway. The truth is that case manufacturers are looking for ways to creatively improve look and feel and design of chassis, and a 5.25-inch bay is a very rigid, boxy component that kind of dominates how you can create the rest of the machine, right? If you have a fan controller on it, if you have a multi-port hub or something on there, it definitely means that you have to have this on the front of the case and it has to face forward, right? So as we flip things upside down and rotate and change case design, that rigidity is really hard to fight against. So, the answer is that there's not a whole lot of people that are demanding it, and more people seem to appreciate the style changes that you can make possible, whether it be in size or color or lighting. I guess color wouldn't affect it, but lighting, that removing those bays allows for. So, sorry. Good luck. I don't know. There are still lots of cases that have 5.25-inch bays, but I will agree with you that most of the newer, better-looking cases are omitting them, much to Josh's dismay as well. Dark Wizzy asks, does 4K texture resolution have anything to do with the ability to tell the difference between 4K and 2K textures on a 4K display, or is it mostly about PPI, with the size of the mesh being the largest factor? So assuming we're talking about here is telling the difference between 4K and 2K rendering on a 4K display, yes, the additional pixel count makes a difference, but only if the source content is high enough resolution to take advantage of it. So your assertion that, hey, if I'm running this game in 4K, but the textures were built in a way that they don't add additional detail to the things that are being mapped, what is the benefit of that? And I would say probably very little. and depending on the game design, right, you might get some. If it's not just raw texture map, if it's being shaded in a certain way that higher pixel density will improve the look and style, then yes, 4K will improve that. 4K does give you the kind of the polygon advantage as well. So yeah, I mean there are other advantages, but yes, if the textures aren't built to support 4K or higher, then yes, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to see what the advantages are of that, other than taking a lot more processing horsepower from your GPU in order to make it happen. So yes, like everything in gaming, you can be bottlenecked by any one of those components. You can be bottlenecked by the resolution, the texture quality, the geometry processing, all kinds of things. So having them all support 4K is not as easy as simply turning up the resolution dial, if you will. Steve Areno wants to know, I recently upgraded my family member's laptop from a 128 gig M.2 SATA SSD to a 500 gigabyte Crucial MX500. Any ideas on how I could use the original drive in my desktop PC? Well, Steve, assuming that you already have an SSD in your system as your primary drive that maybe is bigger than 128 gigs, then you've got somewhat limited options. If you don't have an SSD, boom, done. If you have a 128 gig SSD, you might consider going into RAID 0 and having a larger capacity primary drive that's faster, as long as you are backing up all of your data accordingly. You could use it as an external USB 3.0 or 3.1 drive. You can go and buy an M.2 SATA to USB 3 dock dongle, if you will. They have those for M.2 drives as well to give you some fast, significant external storage if you wanted to do that. You could also buy the Enmodus Fuse Drive software if you wanted, which is essentially the basis of StoreMI, which is the AMD technology for tiered storage caching that they offered with the X470 chipset. But you can buy it and run it on any platform from Enmodus themselves, including Intel platforms if you want to do so. And if you have a hard drive on there, you can accelerate the hard drive with the 128 gig SSD as its first tier cache. So that's another option to look at as well. There are ways to utilize that. Don't just let it sit on your desk. Even if it's an external drive that you can keep in your bag with you, I think you'll see the advantages of that pretty easily as well. Anonymous asks, are you guys on board with NVIDIA's latest NDA requirements? HardOCP thinks it's too far-reaching, and has the article headline from the HardOCP story here. If you listen to the podcast last night, at least the end of the show, you'll get a little bit of what my thoughts are on this. I believe that for as long as I've been doing this, there have been NDAs involved in almost every product discussion, whether it be from Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, MSI, Asus, Gigabyte, that are sending out new motherboards. It's a very typical thing for us to get an NDA. It is not as typical for us to see an NDA that doesn't list a specific product or doesn't list at least some range of time frame. It will expire by the end of July 31st, what have you. The NVIDIA one is kind of a more general NDA meant to apply to, for multiple years, for all products, for any information that they share with you, etc. And it's a little bit different in that way. Not that we haven't also seen those previously. My kind of takeaway from it is that it's obnoxious for NVIDIA to put that forward unnecessarily. What they don't want to do is put out an NDA for, hey, we're going to release Turing graphics cards in August, and the embargo for this NDA will expire August 31st or what have you. And suddenly now the story is NVIDIA to launch new Turing-based graphics cards August 31st, and all that would be necessary to know that information is that there was an NDA out with that specific expiration. So I think probably part of this was they just wanted to get something out there that was generic to kind of cover them in all areas going forward. There's some language in there that's very confusing or upsetting if you look at it. If you're not looking at it from like the legal background, which admittedly I don't particularly have. My thought is this: having signed a ton of NDAs, I have never had an NDA shown to me again afterwards. I've never had a company say, Ryan, you screwed up. Here's this NDA you signed. We need to have a discussion about it. Not even that far. And I've definitely never had legal threats or legal action taken against me on some of these embargoes. And this is an iffy area, right? Because we do reviews and we do news. And sometimes if somebody leaks something out on news, a new processor leak or a chipset leak, our news guys write about it. And we separate the NDA based on me. So once I sign an NDA on some processor, I won't talk about it publicly. But the news guys aren't aware of that NDA. They aren't aware of the information that I have, so they are, not bound to it. And that's how we kind of keep it separate. But even in those instances where they could probably, if AMD really wanted to come after me and say, hey Ryan, you'd signed an NDA about the first Threadripper, and then we saw these stories going up on your website that this is happening. They might have been able to threaten some legal action, try to scare us away on some stuff, or prevent us from doing reviews of that. And it's never happened with AMD or NVIDIA, Intel, or any of the OEMs that we deal with. It's never actually been instituted. And in reality, these NDAs are trying to prevent leaks. They're not trying to make me write good things about their product. They're just trying to prevent leaks, which, as somebody who follows the embargoes and has done so for 15 plus years on this side, I like that. I would like that to be the case more often. And if you talk to any of the reviewers that are honest with you out there, that are also the ones not leaking, which is the vast majority, they will tell you that we want this to be a fair placement for content to be generated, right? We want everybody to be on even terms. We don't want people launching all the slides and all the details of the architecture for a new GPU 3 weeks ahead of time while we're still sitting there bound by an NDA. So it's a very complex thing. I don't think what NVIDIA is doing is that far outside of the bounds that it requires, different thinking than the previous ones, even though it does look and read a little bit different than what we've seen. If NVIDIA decides to attack some journalists because of something based on this NDA, then we can revisit this discussion. But I just don't see it happen. And this one also kind of answered on the podcast last night from TJ Throwaway, who asks, Josh didn't know last week, so what model ThinkPad do you guys use on the studio table during the podcast? So it's actually changed a little bit this week, but I used to use a ThinkPad X1 with a 7th gen processor in it. Maybe it was a 6th gen. I don't know. It was a 5th gen ThinkPad X1 device. There is the Silver Yoga 920, which is kind of our studio PC. It has all the show notes on it. It allows me to browse through the articles when we're doing the show. And then Ken was previously using the ThinkPad T470S machine as well. So we had a bunch of Lenovo devices up there. Ken is now shifted over to, if you watched the podcast last night, he's using a ThinkPad X210, which apparently it never actually existed. And it's one of these from China customized ThinkPad chassis with 8th gen processors in it. It's an interesting story. We'll talk about it on a future article and on the podcast in an upcoming episode as well. So yes, a lot of Lenovo has been in our podcast lives for a very, very long time. So as predicted, this was not a shorter episode of the mailbag. So I guess that's good for everybody, unless I just rambled too long about random stuff. So if you have new questions for us, more questions, please leave them for us in the comments on either this video or on PCPer.com. And if you like the content we create and you want to support us, you go to patreon.com/PCPer, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks.